All right, how are we doing tonight? How are we feeling about the blog project? We are going to start tonight by going through and putting numbered notes and everything just as a review to remember where we left off. We've got some work to do to make the read more button work. We are starting to see kind of moving some components over from HTML. Hopefully you guys are taking some notes, right, on, well, what's it take to get our capstone project over? But how are we feeling in general?
Feeling decent about it. Um, I like that that looking at that quiz. I like that you had went over route yesterday, so we could get an understanding of that. I still don't understand it for real, but
Okay,
it
yeah,
was
so
good
let's
to see it.
let's talk about route a little bit, right? Because what HTML is basically doing for us is here. Let me pull up the code and we'll talk about the route a little bit. I'm gonna pull actually if I pop open VS Code. Let me see if it helps me out. Yeah, okay. Um, okay, so over in our vanilla version, right, in the version without React, how did we make a new page? All we had to do is we had our index.html, and then if we wanted our read page to have certain content on it, all we had to do was create read.html, and then in our index.html, all we would do is link to that in our where do we do it? In our script.js, probably, right? So we had, okay, ahref read.html. That means that if we have it open, at any point, we could go to /read.html and it would pull that post up directly, right? So that is kind of the browser doing the routing for us. It's saying, hey, I found a page called read.html. You're asking for read.html. I'll show you that. Makes sense so far. What
Yeah,
we
sir.
have, okay, what we had to set up was in React, and I'm gonna fire up my run start here, was we sometimes have components that we don't want to be their own pages, right? So in this case, on the home.js, we actually had something called post preview. What is post preview? Post preview is this whole component right here, right? That is the title, the author, the timestamp, a little preview, and the button for read more. So we don't want someone to be able to go up to the top here and type in post preview.js. We see that comes back with a 404. It's telling us it's not found. That's what we want because we don't want users to be able to go into separate components that are meant to be in other components like the home page. So React gives us more control. They say by default, we're not going to assume that you want a multiple page application. If you do want a multiple page application, we're going to combine those two together in the routes. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, you tell us what paths, what URLs you want to be their own separate pages. And based off of those routes, you are going to tie them to a component. So the only 4 routes that we have set up are tied to 4 separate components. We want our homepage, our new post, our read post, and the login to be their own pages. We don't want something like post preview to be their own page. So we don't include that as a route. If we want post preview to show up like we do on the home page, we can use that component nested in another component, but because it's not its own page, we don't make it its own route. So basically think about a router as a way to turn a component into its own page in the browser. Does that help?
Yes, sir. It gives me slightly a better understanding. I think I got to do it more myself to to really get the hang of it.
Yep, that's
It's pretty
totally makes sense.
straightforward though. It's just I'm not my mind be all over the place with this stuff.
Yeah, and this is the first time that we've seen a router, but you guys will definitely need a router for your capstones, right? Because your capstones are obviously multiple pages. And this project, we keep on coming back to it and getting more and more practice with it. So we will set up more routers as we get further down in the curriculum. But the good news is next week we have a kind of a review and a project week set up. And so the goal of that is for you guys just to come in with questions and say, hey, can we practice getting a router set up? Can we document those steps in a way that we understand them, right? And we could spend an entire half a class doing that. So that's what's coming up in the curriculum next week, right? We've got a day, at least a day, if not two, left on the blog project. We're going to do the chat project part 2 that I completely forgot about. Again, my bad. And then next week, we're going to open it up, and it's kind of going to be like an open office hours. You're going to have a chance to work on your capstone, practice bringing that over into React. You're going to have a chance to say, hey, I'm stuck here, or React is throwing this error. You'll have an opportunity to say, hey, can we get more practice with APIs in React? Or you may say, hey, I'm struggling to bring all of this over into my React. Can we focus on practicing bringing this over, or using Bootstrap in React, or anything like that? So next week, just to get those gears turning in your head, start thinking about some questions you may be having around your capstone, around anything really that we've covered up until this point, because next week, again, is going to be kind of an open office hours kind of week where you get to ask questions about either your capstone, anything that we've covered up until this point, or any homework assignments, right? You may say, hey, I really struggled on the quiz last week. There was one question there. Can we go over that answer? And that is also totally fine. So just know that you do have that project review week coming up starting on next week. Terry.
Dumb question, but what's a component again?
Certainly not a dumb question,
Good
but a
question.
very important part of React. So a component is just a group of actually, I want to use the official React definition and then build from there. So if I go to learn, excuse me. Okay. React apps are made of components. A component is a piece of the UI, the user interface, that has its own logic and appearance. A component can be as small as a button or as large as an entire page. So let's break that down a little bit here. This second post, or first post, actually it looks like this. This whole card right here is a component. Why is it a component? Well, because we made post preview, and a component kind of has two parts to it. It has whatever is in the return in the second half of the component is what actually shows to the user, right? That every component must return out something to display. The first half of a component, if we look in something like home.js, is all of the logic that it takes to display something to the user. So in the first half of a component, we're going to have any hooks like useState, defect, or any functions for setting up an event, right? So I don't know if we have any events here, but we would also have any event functions that happened up in the first half. That's what React calls the logic part of it. And then the second half of the function is whatever it returns. So what that component actually shows to the end user. Components are reusable, right? In this case, because we have 3 blog posts, we are able to set up that post preview to show up 3 times. A component can also be used in a route like we did in app.js. So these are the 4 components we're using to be a separate page. So just like we can nest elements in HTML, we could put an LI in a UL, we can nest components in each other as well. So app.js is its own component that returns out a router provider that picks one of these 4 components based off of the route. And in the home component, we also use something like the post preview to return out yet another component. And so we are now seeing nesting components. We've got app, we've got home, and we've got the post preview that are all nested within each other. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so like, so should I like think of components like, because you mentioned they like reusable, so should I like think of it as like a function?
Yes. So it is a very special type of function that returns HTML and can accept props and can have its own state. And just out of curiosity, I have a feeling that ChatGPT is actually going to come up with a better definition of what a component is than what React's official documentation does. So I'm going to go to the reference and look at components. And yeah, they don't really have a good definition there. So let's see what ChatGPT comes up with. Define component in the context of React. Component is a self-contained reusable piece of UI that can be composed together to build complex user interfaces. Components can be thought of as custom HTML elements, and they encapsulate their structure, style, and behavior. The 2 types of components in React are class-based components and functional components. If you ever see, and this is a good thing to bring up, this is the older style of making a component. This is using what they call a class-based component, which is closer to object-oriented programming. So if you ever see any code like this, this is just the older style of doing it, right? So you can kind of think about this as we don't use var anymore when we make variables, we use let or const instead. The same goes with React. So whenever you make a component from scratch, chances are you're going to use the functional components, which I will scroll down to and show in a second. But if you are happening to read someone else's React project and you're reading through this and you're like, this doesn't look like React, it actually is. And even up until modern day versions of React, they still support these older ones. I was actually the old man shouting, get off my lawn, because I've been using React for so long. This is the only way I knew how to make components, right? And we hired an entire team, and they came in and they were like, yo, old man, stop making components out of classes. We use functions now. And I'm like, but classes are better. They are easier to understand. No, they're not. And I learned that lesson the hard way. So React over the past, I want to say 3 to 5 years, has kind of pushed everyone over to function-based components. So down here, we can see what a function-based component looks like. Of course, we have the name of the component. We can see things like the on-click and part of the UI. That is all part of the return. And then the top half is the logic half of the component, where we're going to set up state, use effects, any other hooks, and then also any kind of the functions that are going to be fired off from events. And then you can see ChatGPT says it's defined using a plain JavaScript function, can use hooks, and are simply and generally preferred for their conciseness and ease of understanding. Valid. Took me a little while to convince me of that a couple years ago, but I have drank the functional components Kool-Aid, and that's where I'm at. And then they go on to say that components can accept inputs called props. sort for properties, which are used to pass data from parent components to child components. Props are read-only and cannot be modified by their child component. Very long answer to a very short question, but hopefully that covers everything.
Yeah, definitely. I noticed with like the class because if I recall, I think Python is kind of similar to the class because when I was looking at free code camp because it was at with the lesson with the class. Well, I don't think it was like React, it was like JavaScript. I'm like, class, I know that one. It was because I did a little. I tried to do it, but it was just kind of complicated. Well, when doing Python stuff. So when I see class and then the super, I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm able to like kind of do this a little bit, but I wasn't sure if you wanted us to do it like that, like have class, or still stick with like functional. But
I would recommend sticking to functional only because that is what the entire community has moved over to. So there are some code bases where companies are basically saying if it's already a class-based component, leave it like that, right? We don't need to switch over all at once, and you can intermix them in React. So you could have a React project that has a couple older components that are still class-based, and then any new ones that get created, the company's kind of moving it over to functional. They're so uncommon now that we don't even cover how to make a class-based component, or talk about the differences between what we call the component lifecycle, which is, hey, what happens when the component first loads, what happens when the component mounts, what happens when the component updates, what happens when the component will unmount and did unmount. Which was the only real benefit of the class-based system, was that it was a little bit easier to hook into what we call the component lifecycle. But because functional components are so common these days, that's kind of all that we teach, and that's all the newer React documentation will cover. Everything, you can still access state, you can still do things like, hey, when the component shows up, make this API call, little differences, but for the most part, we've moved away from class-based and into functional components. And JavaScript is really weird. JavaScript is what they call a multi-paradigm language. So what do they mean by paradigm? It's just basically what category programming language does this fit under. So Java, entirely object-oriented programming. Python, I do think it's possible to do it without object-oriented, but for the most part, most of Python is object-oriented. Whenever we hear object-oriented, we're thinking about things like inheritance and classes are the two like big concepts with those, right? JavaScript is really weird in that it started out not as a object-oriented programming language, and then it kind of evolved into one. So if you ever look up JavaScript in Wikipedia, you will find that it is listed under paradigm as multi-paradigm, event-driven, functional, imperative, procedural, and object-oriented. So in other words, basically all the paradigms that exist for different kinds of programming languages, JavaScript manages to cover almost all of them. So we don't use JavaScript in an object-oriented fashion. React, when they got started, the only way to make a component was to make a class that basically inherited all of the functions of a component into the class, right? And React has said, all right, not a lot of people use JavaScript as an object-oriented language, so they moved away from that and into the functional type, which is what we used, right? There's a function to create the component. If you look up Python, we'll see that it is also listed as multi-paradigm, but object-oriented happens to come first, and then they do list all of those other ones out. So Python is probably the only language, let me say, because there are thousands of programming languages, right? So I would say that Python, out of the top 10 most common programming languages, Python is probably the closest to JavaScript in terms of being very flexible and having all these different paradigms with it. And then finally, I'm going to look up Java, and you will see, yeah, it's not much better. But for the most part, Java is exclusively used as an object-oriented language. Python tends to be, but also supports others. And then JavaScript tends to be event-driven and functional, and then the rest of those kind of follow. So the order that Wikipedia lists them, I think, is kind of the order in which they are most commonly used. Sorry, that's a little bit of a rabbit hole.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate you answering my questions.
Of course. Any other questions before we do a review of yesterday's code? Okay, so we are going to go ahead and dive in. We start all the way up at app.js. Well, technically we start all the way up at index.html, right? So index.html comes in here. It sees that we set our title. It pulls in Bootstrap. It then comes down to this div ID root. That div ID root in index.html gets targeted right here. It links us into our app. Our app is coming from our app file, and ultimately comes from our app.js here. So technically it goes index.html into index.js, index.js into app.js. But for our sake, we're going to say app.js is kind of the starting point here. At any point, feel free to raise your hand, come off mute, tell me to shut up, ask a question, tell me to slow down. The whole point of this review is that we want to make sure that we understand everything we did yesterday, so that what we build on tonight is additional solid foundation, right? So if at any point we hit a point in the documentation, in the comments, right, where you go, I don't really understand what that comment is, or I didn't think it was happening in that order, those are times to tell me to pause and ask questions. Okay, so let's dive in here. We import our app.css. So that's just pulling in, that's kind of a global style sheet. That is, instead of using the link tag, we are using the import. And then I'm going to say a couple of things here. We're going to say, number one, import functions and components from React Router DOM, which is a package we installed using the terminal command npm install React Router DOM. Now we come in and we say, number two, import components that we would like to be their own pages. Then we come down and say, number three, set up routes that connect paths to elements. Combined, they make a route, which makes them their own page accessible in the browser. So what do we mean by that? The path is /new post. The element or the component that we want to show up for that path is the new post component. This new post component is getting imported from here. So we tie the file path to the component coming from that file path to the component being used as an element to the path in the browser. In other words, when we go to new post here, it should ultimately connect to the new post in here. So in our app, we connect those routes. Does anyone? Yes, Joe.
Which paths need to match the element name, if at all?
The file name needs to match here. Because we are exporting default, we actually could call this anything, but whatever we call it here has to be consistent here.
Gotcha.
So we could theoretically call this read post page and read post page here. And then if we go to read, it would still pull that up. That is not true if we export just the component name and not export default component name. So the way we import and export changes based off of the way that we do the export. Let me rephrase that. The way that we import changes based off of what we export, which kind of makes sense, right? We need to know what's getting exported so we know how to import it. But it is generally best practice to name them the same component in the file that it is in wherever you're importing it, with the exception of if you happen to have two imports that are called the exact same thing, and at which point you can do something called aliasing the import, where you basically say, this is how it's getting exported, but I want to call it this on the new page, and you just use an as keyword for that. But anyway, ES6 modules with imports and exports get a little complicated. Okay, any other questions about routes? Reminder that we cannot use the React Router DOM unless we install it first in the terminal. And what I didn't say yesterday is this terminal is currently running the server, right? So if I type in npm install React here and hit enter, it's like not going to do that, right? I'm busy running the server. I can't go and install anything new. So if you did need to install another package, you would have to hit Control-C. That would stop the server. Control, not Command. Control-C stops the server, gives us the terminal back. We could then go run any npm install command that we needed. And then we would have to remember to go back and restart it, because if we don't restart it, we get a site can't be reached over in our browser. So what we need to do, come over here, run our npm run start again. That will fire up our blog and we're good to go.
Terry's also looking for the live share link.
Oh, I haven't started it yet. This live share link is going to change once we get our file set up for tomorrow. I will post it in the chat. And now I have chat open, so I will see your questions there. So yes, we are still working in day one blog just to get the comments done. And then once comments are done, we will switch over and get a new folder set up with a new live share link. Okay, so we come down to our router provider and we say number 4, hopefully, yes. Use router provider from React Router to show our routes based off path in browser. Okay, now it goes, okay, what's the route in the browser? The route in the browser is our home page. So we go into our slash and we go, all right, let's jump into the home page. So we come in here, we say number 5, load the home page based off the route / path. Number 6, set up 2 variables in state, both of which will be based off data that will eventually be shown to the user. Start loading off as true because we have to wait for the API call to get the data. And start the posts out as null because they haven't loaded yet. Sorry, I shouldn't say API call. This should be local storage. It will be an API call eventually, one of these days, once we learn how to make a backend. But for now, it's just local storage. Any questions on that? State, again, just a very special variable. React calls it the component's memory. I like to think about it as a variable that will ultimately control what gets shown to the user, including any information inside that variable. Okay, now, number 7, use effect with an empty array as a second parameter tells React to do the function only the first time the page loads. This prevents an infinite loop of us reading posts from local storage, then setting them into state, which then loops back to local storage. Okay, what do I mean by that infinite loop? That's really important to understand. The page first loads and it says, let's go get the item from local storage. Parse it out, figure out if there are posts or not, and whether or not there are posts or not, set them into the state. The problem here is whenever we set something into state, it updates that and causes this component to reload with the now updated data. When we cause that component to reload, it goes, oh, you would like me to get those posts from local storage. Sure, no problem. I can do that for you. I got the posts. Let me set them into state. We update state. It comes back in and it goes, oh, I need to get those posts from local storage again. And it loops and it loops and it loops. Now, that may not immediately cause a performance impact, but when you're loading lots of data, especially when you're making an API call that keeps on going out to your API and requesting the data, you can really end up like spamming or doing a DDoS attack, distributed denial of service, accidentally in your front end code, keep on making these API calls. So it's super important in our use effect that we say, hey, this should only load when the component first shows up. And after that, even if the state updates, don't worry about doing this again. Only do this the first time the component shows up. And again, we tell React the only time the component shows up for the first time by passing this empty array in here. So we actually skip over all of this because it's in a function. We know functions don't actually run until we call them. So we put this use effect out there when we go, hey, when it's loaded, go do this thing. Then we come down to number 8, and say, check to see if loading is true. It is from number 6 up here. So show the loading ... message to the user. We hit a return here, so we are done loading any of that user interface, and we think we're done. We think we're off the hook for this component, but use effect now wakes up here and goes, okay, the component has loaded, right? I am now showing something to the user. What would you like me to do because the component is loaded? So here we come in and we say number 9, the component has now loaded, sometimes also called mounted. So go run the use effect here. We retrieve posts from local storage, parse them from the string to an array, set loading to false, no matter if we have posts or not, we have pulled what we have from storage. So we no longer want to show the loading message. Then we say there are not posts in local storage. So set the posts to an empty array. Pausing there, any questions? Okay, so we come down here and we say number 13. Loading is now false, so skip this return. Then we come down, we show the H1, we show the div, and this is where we get into our ternary operator. Check to see if the number of posts in state is 0. It is, so return everything between the question mark and the colon, right? Inline if statement. If this is true, show this. Otherwise, show this. So we come in and we say number 15, display this message. Now we're done. Says there are no new posts. We've followed through with everything. We've loaded this in. We've triggered the state refresh. We show that message. Any questions? We're not totally done with the documentation, but hopefully we're getting there, right? Because we're going to hit a point with new posts where all of this is already documented out. So we come down here and we say number 16, user clicks link to new post. That takes us all the way back up to app.js, and we say 17, user clicks link on homepage. So we go to this component. That takes us in to new post. Use navigate just sets up, create post we ignore because that event hasn't happened yet. We come down to the return and we say 17, show form. The user types in all of the form stuff, and then we say 18, user submits form. Now, this is where it gets interesting because we have all of our previous documentation in here. So we are going to try and renumber these as quickly as we can. User submits form, that's 18. 19, the function runs because the form was submitted. 20, we prevent the default. 21, we go to the event that was triggered. I'll take that out. 22, retrieve the existing post from local storage. 23, create the variable. 24, check to see if there are existing posts. 25, there aren't, so make an empty array. 26, create the object to hold everything. 27, add the object from 26 to the array from 24. Uh, 25, 27, 28. Use local storage, convert the post into an array from 27. Store the string. This is going to be 29 from the key of posts from 28. Okay, now we navigate. So we say number 30, take us back to the home screen. This is a little different. Instead of using window.location, we're using navigate, that came from the use navigate hook at the top of the function. In other words, we hook into navigate, which is coming from React Router DOM, and we navigate back to the home page. Finally, we are almost done with a review of last night's code before we dive into new code. We come in and we load the home page again. So new post is 31. We need to set up the variables and state again. We come down and we say 32, 33, use effect now has the use effect will run in the background. We come down here and we say loading is loading. So that's 34. And we think we're done, but we come back up here, we got to run this again. So we say 35, now run everything. 36, parse them out. 37, set loading to false. But this time there are posts in local storage. And so this is what's really important, right? This is where we go, all right, this is what's different in React. In React, instead of generating out the HTML, all we're going to do is set the posts into state. Let's see what I mean by that. I'm going to come in here and say 38. Because there are posts from local storage, set them into state. That now comes down here, and we say 39, there are now posts in state, but they are, there are no longer 0 of them. So instead, map over them. What does map over them do? Well, down here, we're going to say 40, map loops over each post from state and returns a post preview for each one of them. Now we go into post preview, and this is where we leave our notes. We say number 41, show this component for each of the posts from local storage. Okay, that catches us up to date. That gets us running all the way through what we've accomplished in React already. Know that that took 30 minutes. Hopefully that's a review of catching us up to where we left off from last night. Do we have any questions up until that point? It is a little different from the way things ran in the vanilla JavaScript, but hopefully we're drawing parallels between the two of them. We're starting to see, oh, instead of saying .inner HTML, we are going to just use those curly braces in the return of React. Oh, instead of looping over each one of the posts with a for loop, instead, we're going to loop over those posts in state using the .map instead. Pausing there for any questions, anything we need to review before we dive into new code tonight. Okay, let's go ahead and get our file set up. I'm going to go ahead and close out of this so the live stream will not be live. I am going to keep my code up from I forget what week it is, but day 3. Let me see if it shows up. Week 9, day 3 is going to be the reference code we keep using. That is the final version of the blog. So I'm going to, the new commented code will be up on GitHub. Let me go do that now before I forget. Week 15, day 1 with comments. Okay, that code is now up on GitHub. Okay, I am going to close out of my localhost 3000. I am going to head to my code folder. I'm going to go into my week 15. I'm going to pop open my day 1 blog, and I'm going to delete out my node modules. Again, this makes it easier so that we can duplicate all of the code and reinstall it and not have multiple copies of the code with these like 0.5 GB folders of all the dependencies. Once I delete the node modules, I'm going to go back into my Finder, go ahead and right-click duplicate my day 1 blog, and then I'm going to rename that as day 2 blog instead. Then I'm going to take my day 2 blog and drag that into my VS Code. And I'm going to right-click open an integrated terminal. The live share link is coming to you in Zoom. And I will also do a live share to my reference code. Yep, there's different links. Okay, now a reminder, when we fire this up in the terminal, because we deleted our node modules, if I try and do an npm start, you guys are going to see that I get an error message that says command not found. That is because we deleted our node modules. Really, really quick fix for that. All we need to do is before we can start, we need to do our npm install or npm I. They both do the exact same thing. As soon as I hit the enter button on that, it will take a second to regenerate out my node modules folder. When it is done running and you see your day 2 blog sitting back at the bottom of your terminal, you can go ahead and do your npm start on that, and that will fire up where we left off yesterday. So we should see my first post 2 or 3 times, but the content is not unique across them. And if you want to, you can switch over to your week 9, day 3, go ahead and fire up your live server on that reference code. Just keep in mind which tab is which, because we don't want to accidentally be in the wrong one. Everyone good to rock and roll? Anyone need a minute? Okay. All right, where do we leave off? Well, according to my comments, in my home.js, I have my post preview, and my post preview is coming from looping over the posts in state. The problem that we have is that the data from the post is not showing up in here. So how do we take data and pass it into a child component? What is that concept called in React?
Wow.
A prop. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this post from state and pass it in. Let's call it post details. Post details is going to come from my post from state. So let's just review that flow. I don't think I'm going to be able to fit it all on my screen. Stupid comments. Okay, I know this is super tiny, but if the visual helps you, that's what we're going to try. We go from local storage and we get the posts and send it into posts as string. We parse that out to get the posts. We take those posts and set them into state. Set into state comes up to our use state and updates our posts in state. Our posts in state, we then map over to get each individual post from state. That map is just a for loop that is going to return a post preview that is going to take that post from state and send it into post details into our post preview component. If that doesn't look like a messed up football play, I don't know what does. But any questions on that? If you would like to take a quick screenshot of that, if you are someone who can follow those lines without them being drawn, that's totally fine as well. Or be in YouTube as well, that you can review it. Okay. So let me blow this back up to a human readable size. Okay. Now we have to tell our post preview, heads up, you are going to get those post details. So I'm going to pop open my post preview and I'm going to tell my post preview in curly braces, hey, you are going to get the post details. Okay, let's make sure all of this is working. I'm going to console log out my post details at the top of my component. And if I come over here and pop open inspect, I should see an object. And if I pop open that object, I see the author, the content, the timestamp, and the title. Okay, well, that's kind of interesting. Where did those four come from? How does it know about author, content, timestamp, and title? Because if we look all the way back in our new post page, look at what we set up right here. That object is going through local storage to the home page, to come out of local storage, to go into state, to get mapped over, to be sent into our post preview component. So this object here is making it all the way down to our post preview here. That means that I can come in here and take my first post out and say, I want to get my post preview dot title. I also want to get my post details dot author. My content is going to show up as post details dot content. And the timestamp we got to do a little work on. And I got to cheat on that one and see how did we make that show up. All right, we did to locale time string. So here, I'm going to say make a new date from the post details dot timestamp, and then to locale time string that time. So if I pop open Chrome, I should see our posts showing those details. And pause there because I know that was a lot of little updates. Post details is coming in up the top. Check your console log here. If your post details is null or undefined, we got a problem. Don't update everything else. Figure out why you're getting undefined or null there first. If it is showing up in your console, now we get to go through and update all of the different data based off of those post details that are getting sent in.
Max,
Yes.
where are we getting the content for post details from?
Post details here is getting sent in the post details from the post from state. Post from state is coming from our map, which is looping over the posts in state. The posts in state are coming from our set posts in state, which is coming from posts, which is coming from posts as string, which is coming from local storage. So the real answer is up in home. We get the posts from local storage, we set them into state, we map over them from state and pass each individual post down in as post details into the post details prop, which we then use the keys, which ultimately all got set in the new post page. And the ultimate result, you may have a duplicate on your page, that's totally fine. But on here, we should see our post content, and you should be able to go to new post, actually fill out that form, hit the save button or make post or whatever the button says, and it should show up on your homepage.
I think I broke my React app. Yeah, take
Done,
a,
broke it. Go ahead.
I don't know. I think I deleted something by mistake, but like it's not letting me like run it. When I try to run it, it tells me it can't be found.
I think the problem is that you open the terminal down in your SRC folder. So if you give me remote, all we should have to do is in your terminal, I'm just going to cd space period period. That takes you up into your blog folder.
Oh,
Now, the npm install is still quite mad at you. The other problem you have is your package.json has gone MIA. Can you have the live stream open? Can you pull that over to this monitor?
oh,
The live code. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. I'm gonna cheat and I'm just gonna grab my package.json. I'm not quite sure how that got deleted, but I'm gonna take that and make a
okay,
new
done.
file called package.json. And this lock shouldn't be in there, so I'm just gonna delete that. Okay, so if we paste my package.json in, close it, and then do our npm install. It isn't yelling at us, so that's progress.
Okay. It looks like how it loads.
It's thinking. I don't like how long it's thinking, but it is thinking.
It's annoying. Oh, it worked.
Okay.
Maybe.
And now we should be able to start back up. Okay. And then the only other problem is, and this is good for everyone to see as a good reminder, on our homepage, we have our post preview, but we need to give this post from state, we need to pass that down into the post preview itself. So what we do is we call it post details is equal to the post from state. Then in our post preview, we need to say heads up, you are going to get a prop called post details. And just like that, if we create a new post, oh, boo. Okay, cannot read title in post preview. Okay, let's save that. I think you're close. Let's take a look in your new post. Title input. Title input. Title input. Okay, I don't see any errors there. Let's take a look in your application. Go to local storage, and we can see the title is definitely there. So everything's saving into local storage properly. So post details is coming from post from state. Post details is now getting passed into post preview. Huh?
Maybe.
Oh.
Oh, we just need to refresh it.
That was it.
Thank you.
Of course. Those are really getting me, those. Everything's right. Why isn't it working? Refresh. Oh, that's why. It is. Anyone else need help? Okay. Now we get to make our read more button work. So in our original, if you clicked on the one that said second post, it took you to the second post. That's exactly what we need to set up, but we've got that pesky new thing hanging around called a router. So there's got to be some way we can use that router to say, hey, I'm going to pass you some details about what post we want to show up. The way we're going to do that is in our post preview, we're going to change our anchor tag, our A tag, to a link tag. And if your autocomplete is working in your favor, if you hit enter, it should auto import the link up at the top. We're going to change our href to a 2. Then we are going to say, go to the, I got to open my app.js, the read page. So the problem that we have, though, is if we look in our vanilla JavaScript, we don't just send them to the read page, we also send the timestamp information in so they know which one they want to read more about, right? The idea is that we get the only that specific post. Well, we could throw the get parameter in here, right? We could say question mark timestamp equals, But React Router is smarter. It goes, no, that's actually a really common thing, right? Is that you want to send in some parameter, but instead of having to do it as a URL parameter, which looks kind of messy, what happens if you just send it in and we're going to convert this to a template literal? So we're going to do curly brace and then a backtick, close that backtick, put the closing curly in. Template literals need to be inside curly braces in React in order for those template literals to work properly. Then I'm going to do my $ curly brace because it is a template literal. I'm able to put a variable right in there, and I'm going to say post details dot timestamp. So I'm going to save on that. I'm going to go over to my browser. I'm going to make sure I'm in my React version, which should be on port 3000. I'm going to go ahead and click on that read more button, and you can see the URL takes me to read and the timestamp that I'm looking for. But it's 404. We're going to fix that in a second. But I want to give you guys a second. Make sure you have this link tag right in your post preview. It is no longer an anchor tag, an A tag. We're converting it to a link. We're updating the href to a 2. And then we're using a template literal in curly braces because React does not like using template literals outside of curly braces. So we put them inside that template, inside those curly brace, and then we pass in the post details timestamp. And if you click on the read more button, it will 404, that's okay, but it should have the timestamp up here. You don't have the timestamp as part of your URL, we got a problem. Okay, so I'm gonna come over. Anyone need help? Or another minute?
I'm gonna debug.
Okay. The syntax here is very particular, and we have nested curly braces there. So 9 times out of 10, your problem is going to be probably in there, but not a guarantee. All right, I'm going to keep going unless you want help now.
You can help me.
Okay. Go for it.
It's telling me my link is not defined. I think it has something to do with my syntax.
Good
Am I
reminder.
missing this little slash?
Nope, you're good there. It is a capital letter, so we know that this is, give me a remote. We know that this is a React component because it starts with a capital letter, right? Compared to like the div, which starts with a lowercase, so we know that's an HTML element. Well, whenever we're using a React component, especially one that is not defined on this page, we need to remember to import it. So this link is not defined. It's just telling you, hey, I don't know where link is. What is link? So what we need to do is import link from React Router DOM. And sometimes autocomplete wants to help you out, whether when you're making the link, sometimes it does not. So if I save that and I refresh, you can click our read more. Now we got a different problem when we got read undefined. Well, that's not great. We need a slash here, and then our timestamp is going to be a lowercase t. So let's read on that. And now you've got that URL right, and we're going to fix the 404 next.
Thank you.
Of course. And again, why do we debug? It is not to crucify the fact that you have a bug. It is to show what the most common bugs are and how we trace through how we debug them as a group, right? Because just because one student gets a bug probably means there's a good chance another student is going to get that same bug at some point in their careers, right? And so that's why we spend the time debugging in class. Okay, saying 404 not found. And I'm like, what do you mean it's 404 not found? You're on the read page. Well, React Router is confused because it's like, yeah, I'm reading something, but there's this number at the end of it. I don't know that you want the read component as its own page. There's some number at the end. Well, we need to tell React Router there is going to be some path, some parameter, some additional detail. So we go over to our app.js, and inside that path, we're going to say, hey, there's going to be another slash, and then we are going to give you a timestamp. But by putting this colon here, we are telling it the letters timestamp aren't going to show up there. Instead, there's going to be some kind of variable that is going to be inside that URL path. So I save that, I refresh, and what I should have is my read post. This is how we get more details about a single thing. If I click on this read more, you see the URL ends in 114. If I click on this URL, it ends in 348. So this is how in your capstone, you would set it up with a router to pull back specific information that you want more details about. So here I am passing in what we call a route parameter, and we tell the router that it is going to have a route parameter with this special colon in the front of it. Okay, now we go over to our read post.js, and we got nothing in here. Like, ooh, okay, well, we got to do some work on that. Let's go look at our vanilla JavaScript, and I'm looking at our read.js, and I'm like, ew, there ain't much in here either, is there? All right, where is all of the content hiding? It's hiding in our read.js. What's our read.js doing? Always let's make sure that we understand what the JavaScript is doing, or even the HTML, before we move it over to React, because it's a recipe for disaster to try and move it all at once. Because when we move code over, we want to do it in the React manner of doing things. We don't want to just take vanilla JavaScript, throw it in React and go, okay, that's fine. We want to make sure we're doing it in the efficient React manner. So what are we doing? We're saying when the page first loads, that should be a ding, ding, ding moment for you. You go, page first loads, I'm going to need a use effect. Okay, what am I doing? I'm pulling the item out of posts. I'm parsing the information out. Oh, this is interesting. I'm getting the timestamp out of the URL. I wonder if there's an efficient way to do that using the router. Okay, so that's something that we're going to hold in the back of our head. Then we go and we say, well, based off of the date ID, which is coming from the URL, go find in our posts, which is coming from local storage, which specific post we would like to show. Then go get our element by ID. Okay, well, we don't do that. We use state instead, and go make this show up. Okay, so we've got some work to do here. I am going to leave myself some notes. I'm going to break this down into parts so I remember what part we're doing. Before I do that, let's go ahead and do attendance. Not letting you on break yet. I do want to take these notes, but let's do attendance. The secret word tonight is route param. R-O-U-T-E space param. P-A-R-A-M. Okay. So what steps did I say here? I'm going to leave notes in my React component so I know what we need to move over. And this is something I highly recommend you guys doing as well. When you're trying to do a big task like this, and this is only going to take us about 10 minutes to do, we don't want to go hot and heavy about top down. We don't want to just throw it over. We want to be able to articulate what we're trying to accomplish. So what we're going to do up here is say, number one, when the page first loads, and we know that's a use effect in React. Number two, get the item, get the posts from local storage and parse them. Okay, that's everything in here. Then we're going to say, number three, get the timestamp from the URL. Okay, that's everything that we're doing here. Then number four, find the post based off the timestamp. Okay, it's everything that we do here. And then number five, set the time, set the individual post into well, I want to say into state, but that's not really what we're doing over in the vanilla JavaScript, right? So let's put it like this. Generate the HTML based off the data. And I'll say state in parentheses there. All right, do we have any questions about the steps? All right, before we dive into doing all of those, because I want to do that all in one blast, let's go on break a little bit early, be back at 7:20, and we will execute on those steps. Okay, so where did we leave off? Well, we are trying to get our read post page to work, right? And we have this set up already working in our vanilla version. The problem is we have to get this all working in our React version, right? And so instead of going in and trying to do a one-for-one translation of everything, I find it more helpful to break down those steps, right? So actually lay it out, however many it is. It could be 20, it could be 2. It doesn't really matter, right? If we don't know what we're trying to move over, we're not going to be able to move it over effectively. So this upcoming capstone check-in a week from Thursday, right, is not just throw everything over and get all the HTML to show up. You want to kind of do this as efficiently as possible, right? You want to be breaking this down and saying, do I understand what I'm trying to move over? Am I trying to move over too much? So this should be a really good example of, hey, let's break all of this down so that we move it over in the most React-y way possible, right? So let's dive into that. When the page first loads, and then we said use effect. Okay, well, how do we do a use effect? I'm going to come into the use effect.
Screen.
Oh, thank you. I thought I was, sorry. Thank you for that reminder. Okay, so I do my use effect. Use effect takes 2 parameters. One is going to be the function of what happens when the page first loads. And the second is that empty array. The empty array is really important. And if I save that, you will see in my terminal, which is hiding on me, I've got an error message that says use effect is not defined. Now, if your autocomplete is working in your favor, that is totally fine. If it is not, you will probably have this message, use effect is not defined. Very easy fix for that. We just import our use effect from React. And that, as soon as we save, will make the error go away. Okay, when the page first loads, that's our use effect. That kind of happens automatically in our JavaScript code. Now, what do we do in the use effect? Get the posts from local storage and parse them. okay, well, local storage isn't any different in React than it is in our regular JavaScript. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to copy the posts. I'm going to paste that inside my use effect. I'm going to make sure that I get access to those posts in the console log. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to refresh to clear out my terminal, and I can see my 3 posts are coming out. Pause there for a second, but we've got 1 and 2 done already. Okay. Confirm I can see them in the console. We're good to move on to number 3. Get the timestamp from the URL. Okay, well, this is where I'm going to pause and go, we're not going to use the new URL, location href, get the search params, all that stuff. There's a React way of doing this using React Router, and that is a special thing called use params. So we're going to import use params from React Router DOM. And the way that we get access to those params, because they are a hook, is by saying the timestamp is equal to the use params. Well, how does it know that this is the timestamp? We didn't call that timestamp in the URL. What we did instead is in our app.js, when we set up the route, we said, hey, there's going to be a timestamp as part of the path. So we are able to then use that param right here, pulling in from the router to get the timestamp out. Well, we said number 3, get the timestamp from the URL. We kind of want to make sure that this is working. So I'm going to replace my posts with my timestamp, go ahead and save that, and make sure I can get something coming out of my timestamp, out of my route. Oh, and just an update, it seems like YouTube and Zoom are processing videos even quicker. Last night, the video was uploaded 35 minutes after class ended. So in case you were someone who is a late night owl who likes to review videos right afterwards, it does seem that YouTube and Zoom are both processing videos quicker, just an FYI. And to say the most YouTuber thing possible, don't forget to subscribe and like and hit that bell icon. Mostly joking, but you can subscribe to Hack Upstate and you'll get a notification as soon as the videos are ready. But we're not going for views here. We're going for graduates to get them jobs. That's what matters more to us.
It is literally YouTube law. I would know.
Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. All right, anyone have questions? Anyone not have their timestamp coming out in the console? Okay. So you can move on to number 4. Find the post based off of the timestamp. Well, let's look at how we did that in our vanilla JavaScript. We got the date ID out and we called it date ID here. That is okay. We just happened to call it timestamp here. So we got to be aware of that. What did we do? We said posts. Well, we have our posts here. Go look for, go search through all of the posts. So a dot find is actually really close to a dot map The only difference is a dot find is going to find the one post we're looking for by looping over all of them. How does it know which one we are looking for? We're trying to say where the date ID, which again was coming from our timestamp, equals the timestamp from all of the posts that we're searching over. So we're going to take this const post, but we're going to use it a little differently. So I'm going to paste it down here, and I'm going to say, hey, posts is still coming from local storage, so we can use find, search through all of the posts and find where the timestamp is the same as timestamp that's coming from our param. And I'm going to rename this to matching post. So our matching post is looking through all of our posts to find the individual timestamp that we are lining up with the parse int of the timestamp that's coming from the use params. Yeah, so let me review this use params one more time. With React Router, we can tell it, hey, we're going to pass in basically a variable as part of the URL. And so the way we do that is we put a colon in front of it, and then we say the name of that variable is going to be timestamp. So if we look at the URL as part of the browser, it says /read, and then it's got this really long number coming out of it, right? What we are able to do is extract that number, which we call timestamp as part of the path, by going to our read post from React Router DOM, pulling in a hook, again, just a function that is provided to us by the package, whether that's React Router or React itself or any package that we have installed. Well, when we go to actually use a hook, we have to, right? We can't just pull data out of it right away. So we import it so it knows where it's coming in from, and then we say use params. Well, because we're pulling it out of the router is intelligent enough to know that thing that we're trying to extract is called timestamp. So basically, we're lining this number up here, calling it timestamp as part of the path. So in read post, we can pull that timestamp out. So when we console log out the timestamp, it's really pulling out this and logging it out right here. Does that click a little bit better?
Oh,
So-
you're not are you okay, hang on. Let me just make sure I'm understanding this. So you're setting a const timestamp to what based off of where that is in the path in app.js. So it's pulling that directly from the URL. You're not declaring that there.
Correct. Yeah, so if I type in ABC here, I get ABC in the console.
Gotcha.
Don't type ABC there, that's going to break everything. But yes, I am declaring something called timestamp, and I'm letting this hook fill it in for me. And the hook knows what that param is and knows it's called timestamp because in the route, I told it that there's going to be a timestamp there, and it knows I'm not looking for the letters TIME, STAMP because I put that colon in front of it. So that colon is basically letting me set that part of the URL, that part of the path, as a route parameter.
So whatever is written in app.js in the path right there, that needs to equal what you're creating the variable name is in the whatever element you're pulling from.
Correct. So I could call this my ID if I wanted to, and then this would have to be called my ID as well. And that would also work.
Okay.
But I'm going to put that back to the timestamp. So yes, this flows into this, which is ultimately flowing down into this and this.
Um, I'm getting an error. I try to debug, but I can't.
Go for it.
It's seeing my timestamp is not defined. At first, I'm like,
Yes,
oh
because
wait,
it's
I'm
a
supposed to.
times this.
Where is that? I was trying to look for it. Oh, right here. Oh, DD. Okay. Oh, still an error.
Refresh.
Okay. But I'm supposed to get that array, right?
No, we're just doing the timestamp right now.
Okay. Thank
We
you.
changed the console log from the array to the timestamp to make sure timestamp is working. Okay, now let's take that one step further. We think we have found the post based off of the timestamp, but we don't know yet. So let's console log that out. Let's log out our matching post, and we should see a post down in our console. Well, in theory, that's working correctly, but we want to test that, right? Because what if our find algorithm is just picking the first post out and is like, you get the first post every time. So I want to go back to my home page. I want to click on another post that has different content, and I should see in my console that specific content. And in fact, the timestamp here, 099, on mine, your number will be a little different, should line up with the timestamp up in the URL. Okay. If all of that's working, we have now done number 4 correctly, so we're good there. Now we need to move on to number 5. Generate the HTML based off of the data. And then I put state in parentheses. So what does that mean? I've got my matching post here. I want to show that data to the user. Whenever we want to show data to the user, we should immediately have a click in our brain and go, that's state. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say const host in, oh, be careful on your brackets, host in state, singular, right? Because there's only one. We have found just the one that we want to show. Set post in state is equal to a use state that starts out empty. It starts out null. You're gonna get an error here in 1 second. We're gonna see why. Then, instead of console logging out my matching post, I am going to instead set my post in state based off of whatever matching post that I found. Then I'm going to go over to my vanilla JavaScript and steal some of this. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to throw this entire thing in a class name called container. Then I'm going to paste in all of the HTML, and then I'm going to do a little work. I'm going to take out my dollar signs because I'm not in a template literal anymore. I don't need the dollar signs. And we called our post in state, not post. So I need to update those here. So wherever you see a post, update that to post in state. Now, just note here that we don't normally call this post in state. We just call this post, but to make it clearer where we're pulling those variables from, where they're all flowing through, we're being very verbose in naming those variables, right? We're being very descriptive in naming those variables. Normally, what we would do instead is just call that post, and then the matching post is already a different name. So when we set it in, it's not a problem. So variable naming wise outside of class, when you're building something in production, we wouldn't normally call it in state at the end of it. But again, just for the sake of clarity, we're being a little bit more descriptive there. Terry.
So with use param, do we only use that to return like the key or like the value of like in the object?
It's not necessarily the key or value of an object. Use params is used to extract information out from the route. So what we're looking at here, right? The entire route is /read/ the timestamp. But in the route itself, by putting this colon in front of it, we are telling the router that this route contains a parameter called timestamp. That timestamp you can kind of think about as the key, and then you can think about the value as the 1722. Kind of, right? It's not actually an object. It's not using actual key value pairs. No, it actually kind of is. But if you want to think about it that way, that is a good way to think about it. This is the key. And then we use that key here to get the value out. And you are kind of technically right. I'm going to do this because I'm curious.
I was like, I was literally looking at the reach router, and I searched up like use param, and that's like it was giving me like a description of it. So that's the reason why I asked.
Yeah, if I do this is really messy, but I'm going to give it a try. Yeah, so it does come out as an object when you do the use params, and then we're destructuring it there. So it's not an object when it's part of the URL, but when we pull the params out of the URL, the use params is converting it to an object for us. If that made it click, great. If not, you can think about it as whatever we're extracting here just has to match the whatever we're putting in here. But yes, the use params is technically pulling it out as an object. Okay, let me put this back to the way I had it. And we got a couple errors we got to deal with. So if you have a use state is not defined, we can fix that by just throwing a use state as part of the import that is coming from React. Now, we should have another error, whether it's a white screen with gray text or this even uglier one. Tiffany, that's a good question. I'll circle back to that in 1 second. We get a different error that says uncaught runtime errors cannot read properties of null reading title. This is a very common mistake to make in React. It is something we can fix in our code. Does anyone want to guess what this problem is caused by? We actually have seen how to fix this before.
Wait,
The hint is that the order that we write our code is not the order that our code executes.
it doesn't have anything to do with our props, right?
No, props aren't the problem. All right, let's try and break this down a little bit. In order to not mess up all of the numbering that's going on here, because I can see you guys getting confused on the 1 through 5, when in app.js we have a 1 up here, right? So I'm going to try and letter these out so that our numbers don't get intermixed. And then maybe if there's enough time, we can clean the numbers up at the end or tomorrow. So I'm going to call this T1, T2, T3, T4, and T5, T4 to do. I don't know, this is the first time I'm trying this. Okay, now in the read post file, I'm going to call all the numbers out once we get into this file as R1, R2, R3. So we come into our read post. We say R1, extract timestamp from the URL path using React router hook. Okay, pull the timestamp out. R2, well, it would help if I could spell extract. R2, set up a place in state to store the one post we're trying to view. R3, set up use effect once the page has loaded. Now we know that this use effect isn't going to happen until the page loads. So we come down here and we say R4, show the following HTML. Now we come down and hit R6, 5. Never trust me to count anything ever. R5, go to post in state and extract the title. Well, let's go look. Where is post in state? Post in state is up here. It's null. We can't access the title. We can't access the author, the timestamp, or the content because it is null. What do you mean it's null, Max? We did all of this work. It's not null. No, that use effect has not run yet. That use effect hasn't loaded up post in state yet. Well, that's dumb. React should know to wait to do that. Actually, it kind of has a mechanism for that. It's called React Suspense, but it's a newer React feature and we're not really going to dive into it. The reason why React does this is because 9 times out of 10 as a developer, you actually want to show a loading message. You want to be able to control what the user sees before the API call is done, before the data comes out of storage, before whatever it is. If there's something processing, as a developer, we want to be able to control the user seeing a loading message, whether it's a little spinner that you show up, whether it says loading ... whether you have a cute animation of your logo, whatever it is. As front-end developers, we want to be able to control what the user sees when that data is loading. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to modify this a little bit. I'm going to take out R4 and R5, and instead I'm going to say if there is not a post in state, return a p tag that says loading. You can throw that in a container. We could even text center that. Now, okay, now we run into a different error, but let's start there. So now it comes through and it says R4. And again, R just stands for read post because I'm just trying to differentiate the numbers here. So R4, the use effect hasn't loaded the post into state yet. So ignore the second return that will error out trying to access data in an object that isn't loaded. Instead, return this loading message. Then got a tiny little incy bit greedy when I took that HTML over. I come down here, I've got my style tag hanging out here. React doesn't like style tags as strings. React likes style tags converted into objects. So here it says the style prop expects a mapping from style properties to values, not a string. What they're trying to tell us here is they would like me to convert this to an object and camel case the key. The use effect, thank you. The use effect hasn't loaded the post. Okay, so now we save. I'm going to come over here and refresh. Now look, we get our post. This loading screen goes away so quickly, we don't actually even see it. But we now have our post showing, and we can go back and click on another post and see that showing instead. So I'm going to pause there for anyone who's following along. If anyone has questions, needs help debugging, now's the time. And Tiffany, I did not forget about your question. Is it true that using timestamps as keys should be avoided because they can create hotspots? They should be avoided. I don't know. So the reason that I know that they should be avoided is that if you sorry, my brain went in like 19 different directions there. The main reason they should be avoided as keys in React specifically is that hypothetically a timestamp could be the same if two users at the exact same nanosecond submitted it, right? Databases, that is not the case. So when we are loading data into state, normally that is going to come from an API call. And that API call is going to return out an ID, and we can use that as a key instead. That's one thing. The other thing is we shouldn't use indexes in an array as a key, because if we delete an item in the middle of the array, that forces React to go through and re-render all of those items. However, sometimes we don't have any other better alternative, right? In this case, we're not using a database, so we have to generate some ID. We happen to use a timestamp because it's unique enough. When we upgrade this into the database and use an API, we will be updating it to use the IDs instead of the timestamps. So that will be the better approach. I'm not quite sure what you mean by hotspots. I know those are two bad reasons to use timestamps, but you could be entirely right. I just haven't heard of a hotspot specifically in React. Doesn't mean that it doesn't exist or it's not a bad reason, but it's a decent enough alternative when we're not using a database to have an ID. And Joe, we could do that. We could do a set timeout in our use effect. And just to show this, don't follow me here, but just as an example, we could do all of the work to find the post and then say, hey, do a set timeout. And wait 5 seconds, which is 5,000 milliseconds. So if I refresh the page, it says loading, we wait 5 seconds, and then all of a sudden, the post shows up.
That's some chaotic neutral behavior right there.
So you could display, let's make it, let's get it out of neutral. We could display a user, an ad to the user. We could generate some revenue off our blog post here. We could not show a loading message. Make it so when they try to close out of the ad, the X button moves on them when the mouse gets close. Oh, sorry, I'm going way extreme here. But you could do a timeout if you wanted to, just to test to make sure that your loading was actually working, right? So let's say that you were designing the loading screen, right? Say you wanted some like animation to appear. You could do it in a set timeout, or you could comment this out entirely and say, oh, I forgot to set it into state. We get the loading screen permanently, basically. You could then update that so that you got your loading design working. And then when you were done with it, you could comment that set post back in and get there instead. Okay, some really good progress here. I'm feeling pretty good about this. We got our homepage set up. We've got our read more button working. I do want to do some additional work on this. I think we can get our login page working. We'll do a little practice with React on the login. We should set up something that says, hey, if you are not logged in, you can't access the new post page. So we got a little work to do there. And we're also going to play with layout a little bit. So we're going to dive into that as well. I'm going to pause here, though. I'm going to finish commenting this out. So we say the use effect hits the loading. Then we say R5, because the component has loaded, it's currently showing a loading message. Proceed to get posts from local storage. R6, confirm we can access the timestamp from R1. R7, search through all the posts in local storage using a loop and find the one where the storage, find the one where the timestamp in storage matches the timestamp from the params URL in R1. A path / URL, kind of interchangeable. Then R8, set the one matching post we found in R7 into state. That comes down, says R9, skip this if statement, cause post in state is now set. R10, return this HTML instead, which uses the keys set from the post object. And we do some timestamps work and we get our content working and we are good to go. How are we feeling?
I'm trying to understand why you left use stay like null.
It's not null. So it starts out as null. Because it's null, we show the loading message. Then the use effect runs. The use effect does all of the work to find the right post in the local storage. When it finds that post, it sets it. That set now overrides this null and makes post in state equal to whatever is in here.
So does it matter if we like leave like set state like null, even though it's gonna get overridden? Like doesn't matter like you can, let's say you put like, I don't know, like an empty array or like a number or a string or something. Like does it really like matter?
It's not good because what will happen when the page first loads, if we put this in here, it's going to say, like, let's just say we say this is false. No, let's say it's true. I'm not going to be able to replicate it. Let's just say it's ABC. If we do this, what's going to happen? All right, we set it up. ABC is in there. We skip this whole use effect because the page hasn't loaded for the first time. Now it's going to come down and look and say, well, there is a post in state. It's called ABC. So I'm not going to show this loading message. Instead, I'm going to try and look for the title and the author. And then it's going to get mad and it's going to be like, well, ABC doesn't have a title or an author. So the reason why we have to start this out as null is so the if statement here goes, oh, that hasn't been loaded in yet. Because it isn't loaded in yet, show the user the loading message instead of trying to access the title and the author and all of that stuff. And Joe, I just saw your question. I believe by default, it defaults to null or undefined if you don't specify something. But I've seen the argument made that you should explicitly set it to null so that there's no relying on a default for it to hit it, which I kind of agree with. So I think this would work if you take the null out, but by default, it will go to null or undefined. I don't know which. They're not exactly the same. I think it's stupid that JavaScript has a difference between the two of them. A lot of programming languages don't. They consider null and undefined the same thing. But anyway, by default, it will go to one of those two.
Gotcha. Kind of like the same practice as initializing a variable.
Correct. Yes. And initializing a variable and not setting a value is not the same as initializing a variable and setting it equal to null. Because when you initialize a variable and don't set it equal to a variable, it will be undefined, even though it's initialized. Why can't we just agree that null means that it doesn't have a value set to it? Don't know. It's super stupid, but you know what? It's JavaScript. And Tiffany, yes, we can use state with an empty array. In fact, I think we do that on, no, we don't. We don't do it on our homepage, but what we do is set post in state to an empty array if the array doesn't exist yet. So you can certainly start and use state out, just like a JavaScript variable can be any data type. State can be any data type. So state, we saw up here, we use true false, right? That's a Boolean. Is it loading? Is it not? Is it loading? Or is it done loading? You certainly can do a use state and start it out as an empty array. And that's a very common thing to do if you're calling a dot map, because it will say cannot dot map on undefined, right? It doesn't know how to dot map unless whatever data is in the array or whatever data is in state is an array. So it is very common to see a use state as an empty array. In this use case, I wouldn't, because again, that wouldn't trigger this if statement. But you definitely can do that and start a state out as any data type. Okay, any other questions before we move on? Again, want to make sure we've got rock solid understanding of this. Read through the comments one more time, read through them in the numbered order. Reading from the top to bottom is not always the best way to do it. So thinking like the computer, understanding the order that the computer is executing this, really, really important. Now is the right time to call me out on any typos, or to call me out on, I read that and I'm reading the line of code and I still don't get it. Or help out your fellow students, read it and go, I understand that, but I understand it in a different way. That is probably the most helpful thing that you can do to other students. You go, Max is a shitty teacher. I don't understand how he's teaching it, but I do understand it differently. Share those insights. So believe it or not, I'm going to shut up for a full 2 minutes. I'm going to let you guys read through this code, see if you have any questions. Yes, Joe, all of that makes sense to me because null and undefined are both falsy values. So a double equal will equate both of them to false, which is true. But a triple equals is checking type between them, right? So that would be like saying, does the number 1 equal 1 in a string? A double equals it does, a triple equals it doesn't. So null and undefined mean different things. And if you ask me that on a technical test, you could see my gears in my brain turning a little bit, but I would remember that the difference between null and undefined. But in actual programming, it really doesn't matter, other than that type of coming out as an object instead of what you think it would come out of as null. But even then, I don't think I've ever done a type of and gotten burned because it was null and I thought, it'd come out as an object. So it does make sense if like you think through it, but it's one of those things where like people love to bitch in JavaScript about it being complicated, but in actual real life programming, it doesn't really matter.
My favorite website to go to has been WTFJS.com.
Yeah, have you seen the na 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 Batman? Yeah. Just, you're like, this shouldn't happen in computer science, and it's happening in one of the most popular programming languages in the world. But you know what? Here we are.
If that ain't computer science, I don't know what it is.
Okay, final call. Do we have any questions? Do we have any concepts? Do we see any terms here that we would like redefined or defined for the first time? Terry.
Yeah, what's going on with R7? Like I'm trying to I know it's like it's converting timestamp to a number, but I'm not understanding with dot find. Like what is dot
Yeah.
find this is doing?
Yeah, so I'm going to write it as another way because I think that that's going to be a light bulb moment for you. So don't follow me on this, just an example here. I'm going to comment this out and I'm just going to console log my posts. And I'm going to also console log my timestamp. Now I broke things all over the place. That's okay. I'm just looking for the output. So I'm going to scroll up here and I see my timestamp, right? Which we notice right away is a string. That's okay. But I have all of my posts here. Now, if I ask you as a human, I have this number and I am looking for post. Is it post 0, 1, or 2? As a human, you would go, okay, well, I'm going to look at this first one and the timestamp is 348 and we're looking for 099. So that's not it. Okay, now let's look in number 1. Number 1 ends in 114. We're looking for 099. It's not that one. So we open up the last one. 099 matches the, where'd it go? 099 that I'm looking for. That's the post that I'm trying to find and show to the user. Okay, but how did we do that? We looked through each individual post and we compared the timestamp in the post to the timestamp that's in the URL. And if those two were the same, we knew we found the right post that we were looking for and therefore got access to the author and the content and the title and all of that stuff. Well, there are two ways of writing that. Well, there are probably an infinite number of ways of writing that, but the way we could write that is we could say, let matching post, just make a variable. We don't know what it is yet. Now, go get each individual post from all of the posts. And if the individual post that we're looping for, that timestamp equals the timestamp from the URL, right, which we're pulling in all the way up here, then we have found our matching post is equal to this individual post that we're on. Now, if I refresh this, it does the exact same thing. So it just so happens that oftentimes in JavaScript, we are looking to find one item in an array of different items. But we've got to tell the computer, how do we find it? We find it by looking at the thing that we're looping over, that one individual post, is equal to this other thing. So this is one way to write it, and this accomplishes it perfectly fine. But this is a lot of code, right? This is saying set up the variable called matching post, loop over each individual, loop over all the posts to get each individual post, check to see if this individual post lines up with this thing that we're searching for. And if it does, set this variable now equal to whatever we are looking for because we found it. Well, this is kind of shorthand in JavaScript, right? This is saying, hey, still loop through all of the posts to get each individual post. I happen to call it search post here. You know what, let's call it individual post just for the sake of clarity. As we're looping through each individual post, look at the timestamp and see if the one that we are looping over at that time lines up with the timestamp that we pulled out again from the URL. If it does, we have found that post, that one post that we're looking for, and find wherever those two match and make that equal to matching post. So this accomplishes the exact same thing as this. It's just a utility function built into ES6 JavaScript, the somewhat newer version of JavaScript, to basically say, hey, it's very common that we're trying to find one item in a list or an array of items, and .find is just a utility function to let us cherry pick out the one item that we're looking for. There are other methods like that. One is called .filter, right, which achieves something similar to .find, except it's going to return an array of items. So that would be helpful if we had, let's say, a list of to-do items, and we were trying to filter down to the ones that were already done. I think we've also seen .sort already, right, which is saying compare this to this other thing, and based off of that thing that we're comparing, we can sort out the array. We could sort by the date that item was created. We could sort by the author that had created it to do it alphabetically, right? So there are a bunch of different, I'm pretty sure they're called utility functions. I could be wrong about that, but basically all of these functions built into an array that allow us to work with lists, sort, filter, find. I'm sure there are others that I just can't think of off the top of my head. Reduce, map. Off the top of my head, that's what I can think of.
And Max?
Map, M-A-P. There is a .max function, but it's not technically on an array. It's math.max, and it finds the biggest number based off an array you pass into it. Yeah. If you go MDM JS array functions and look into, dot includes is another one off the top of my head. You can see a list of everything over here. So we use .find. Find index is another one, right? If we want to know, if we don't care about what we're finding, all we care about is the index of what we're trying to find. That's another popular one. But you can see in here, we say, hey, go find an element where it is above 10. And what the find is going to do, again, it's going to run a loop under the hood, but it's going to look and it's going to say 5 is the first element. Is 5 greater than 10? No, it's not. Move on to 12 here. Is 12 greater than 10? Yes, it is. So stop running the loop. We don't care about any of the other things. Make found equal to 12, log that out, and we get 12. That's slightly different than filter, which is going to say, hey, go find me all of the words that are greater than a length of 6 characters. So again, we still filter each one of these words. That becomes word. We check the word length. If it's greater than 6, we include that in the array that returns out. And so we get these 3 words based off of these words that are inputted. So lots of, I mean, you can scroll here and see there is a long list of them. Things like .push have been around forever. Just add an item to the end of the array. And then if you go to something like .filter, you'll see this now says baseline widely available. That was not the case 5 years ago. But because all the browsers are now, for the most part, supporting it, you can go into the full compatibility and they'll give you a breakdown of everything. Wow, yeah, this has been supported for a while. I wonder if this is this may be ES5 and not ES6. But something as simple as filtering through an array, you would think has been in JavaScript since the beginning of it. No, turns out that filtering arrays came out supporting in 2013. So the language existed for 20 years and made you write your own algorithm for filtering an array using a for loop before the language actually supported it. Kind of crazy. Joe, you'd be surprised at how often I'll use a dot filter in like a technical interview, and people are like, "What's dot filter?" And I'm like, "It just filters the array. It's been out for literally a decade." And they're like, "Oh, I didn't know that that was built into JavaScript." Okay, I think this is a good stopping point for tonight. I'm not going to push you guys on getting the login. Believe it or not, I'm going to let you out an entire 12 minutes earlier. But I'm going to pause there for any questions. If you are feeling pretty good about this content, I am going to go ahead and push it up to GitHub before I forget, so you can review it. We will finish this project up tomorrow with the login screen. We may even get to deleting a post, doing some CRUD operations, create, read, update, delete. We're already doing our create and read. We can get into delete next. We'll do our login screen. We'll make sure that we set up some routing, and we're also going to learn about outlets and layouts. Some fun stuff coming down the pipeline. I will stick around for a minute or two, as always, in case you guys have questions. Otherwise, have an awesome evening, and I will see you all tomorrow.
So with the thing that you did, isn't that another form of refactoring? What you did?
Yes, except you're asking about this right here. Yeah, so I wouldn't consider this refactoring because the initial way I wrote it is the cleaner way. So what I personally think is the cleaner way. You may look at this and say, I don't understand how the dot find is working, but I do understand how this for loop is working. So I would consider that a refactor. So normally we only consider a refactor as we are taking complicated or repeated code and either drying it out, removing the repeated code, or rewriting it in a way that is either more efficient for the computer, easier for the human, for the programmer to understand, or better documented using comments. So I don't consider this refactored because I think this is a slightly cleaner approach to it. But yes, you could consider this refactoring if you thought that this was an easier way to understand this. But yes, definitely in the realm of refactoring. Just depends how nitty gritty you want to get with the definition. Joe, what's up?
Would you be able to just quickly go over the steps of refactoring code into React?
Yes. I am going to